We are living right in the middle of a paradox that honestly, it just completely defies all logic. I
Yeah.
mean, think about your day so far.
Oh, yeah.
You're existing in this moment where we can bounce, massive amounts of data off satellites and just beam it across the globe in milliseconds.
Right, literally milliseconds.
Exactly. And we have algorithms right now that are mapping the outer edges of distant galaxies. We're training AI to recognize and cure, like, incredibly complex diseases.
It's mind-blowing when you really step back and look at it.
It really is. But then, and here is the profound, inescapable irony, alongside all of this breathtaking technological connectivity, we are fundamentally losing the ability to understand the person sitting right next to us.
Yeah, that is the tragedy of it.
Why is it that the more seamlessly connected we become on a technical level, the deeper and the more hostile our ideological trenches seem to grow?
It really is, I'd say it's the defining contradiction of our time. We are communicating constantly, just continuously bombarding each other with information.
Too much information.
Yeah, right. But we're experiencing this total breakdown in our capacity to just recognize the basic humanity of our fellow citizens.
Yeah.
And, the global data reflects this reality in a pretty grim way.
Yeah.
When you look at recent reports on global persecution, you see hundreds of millions of people, Christians, Muslims, Jewish communities, various spiritual minorities, just experiencing extreme hostility.
Wait, hundreds of millions.
Hundreds of millions. And it's being driven not just by old school authoritarian regimes, but by this highly modernized, toxic rise of religious nationalism.
So we're physically connected by fiber optic cables, but ideologically we are just completely fractured.
Exactly. Completely fractured.
Which is exactly why we are jumping into this deep dive today.
Sure.
We're exploring what I really believe is the ultimate intellectual survival strategy of our time.
I love that framing, survival strategy.
That's what it is. And spoiler alert to everyone listening, it is not a new app. It's not some diplomatic treaty signed on a mahogany table in Geneva.
Definitely not.
We are talking about genuine, unvarnished dialogue between fundamentally different worldviews. And I want to be clear, this isn't some soft luxury concept. It is the absolute hardest intellectual discipline in the world.
It really is. And I think framing it as a survival mechanism is incredibly accurate. Because to understand how to bridge these massive societal divides, we first have to, look under the hood of human behavior.
Right. Get into the mechanics of it.
Exactly. We have to understand the exact mechanics of what happens in the brain when we isolate ourselves. The sheer neuropsychological reality of extremism is just fascinating.
Wait, walk me through that. Because we tend to think of radicalization as purely ideological, right? Like someone reads the wrong manifesto online and they just adopt a toxic belief system.
Right, that's the common assumption.
So how does biology actually play into it?
Well, researchers at Cambridge University have actually mapped this out, and their findings completely disrupt how we usually think about extremism.
Really? What did they find?
They found that an extremist mindset correlates heavily with a very specific cognitive profile. We're talking about lower working memory capacity, much slower unconscious information processing, and paradoxically, a significantly higher level of impulsivity.
Wait, let me make sure I'm unpacking this right. So someone with this specific profile struggles to juggle multiple contradictory pieces of information at the exact same time.
Exactly. That's the lower working memory part.
Okay, so they process new complex evidence slowly, but because of the impulsivity trait, they just act on their conclusions incredibly fast.
Precisely. It is an explosive cognitive mix. And in psychology, this maps onto a concept called the need for cognitive closure.
The need for cognitive closure.
Like
Okay, give me an example of what that looks like in daily life.
Well, imagine a scenario we all face daily, like just scrolling through a news feed. The world is unbearably complex, right? It's highly dynamic, full of gray areas.
Oh, absolutely. It's overwhelming.
Right. And if your brain mechanically struggles to hold all that nuance, the sheer volume of contradictory information actually creates a physiological stress response.
So it literally hurts to process it all.
Yes. You experience this desperate, almost panicked craving for simple black and white answers. The extremist brain simply cannot tolerate ambiguity. It needs the world categorized immediately into safe little boxes. Us versus them, good versus evil.
Okay, that makes total sense biologically. But I do want to push back a little on the real-world application of this.
Sure, go ahead.
Does strict religious fundamentalism, automatically lead to physical violence? Because that feels like a massive leap. I mean, you can be a strict fundamentalist who just wants to live a quiet life on a farm somewhere and not bother anybody.
Right. That is a crucial distinction. Really important. Strict belief absolutely does not automatically lead to violence.
Okay, so what's the missing ingredient then?
Fundamentalism only turns into a weapon when it is mixed with a very specific set of catalysts. First, it requires collective narcissism, this unshakable, toxic belief that your specific group is inherently superior to everyone else.
Right.
It also requires a perceived existential threat from the outside. But the ultimate mediator, the absolute most dangerous catalyst that turns a strict belief into outright hostility, is shockingly banal.
Which is?
It's ignorance.
Ignorance, wow. Which really brings up this idea of half-knowledge.
Yes, exactly.
Like knowing a beautiful, rich, ancient tradition only as a hollow collection of bumper sticker slogans. Because true scholars, the people who actually spend their lives deep in the history of their beliefs, they know the metaphors.
They know the context.
Right. They know the historical context. They know the glaring, messy contradictions within their own texts. But the extremist doesn't want that complexity at all. They only want the dogmas.
Because fundamentalists cannot tolerate the historical interpretations or the gray areas. They treat ancient texts like flat instruction manuals from IKEA.
Yeah, just step one, step two.
Exactly. And that inability to read between the lines of history makes them incredibly easy to manipulate by political agitators.
Which makes them dangerous.
Right. Gordon Allport, who is a renowned psychologist, he mapped this out mid-century with his contact hypothesis. He proved that prejudice stems primarily from a lack of real, meaningful encounters with the other.
The other, meaning people outside your group.
Yes. And modern studies from conflict zones in West and Central Africa confirm this today. It's not enough to just politely walk past someone on the street. We have to establish a societal norm where deep interreligious encounter is actually expected.
There's an ancient equation that sums this up beautifully. It goes, true knowledge creates humility because it shows you the massive limits of your own understanding.
I like that.
But half knowledge creates arrogance. And arrogance is usually just one tiny step away from violence. So if isolation and half-knowledge are quite literally a neurological disease, then meaningful contact is the cure.
It is the literal cure, yes.
But how do we structure that cure? We have to bring together ancient wisdom and modern science. Let's unpack this concept of triangulation.
Yeah, triangulation is key. We're talking about bringing together the hard empirical data of science, the profound depth of spiritual wisdom, and philosophical logic.
So not just picking one lane.
Right. We can't play these disciplines against each other anymore. We need to see how they harmonize.
So science tells us we have to bypass our primal brain to find peace. And the biology of just having a simple conversation is actually mind-blowing to me.
It really is incredible. Our brains are biologically wired for empathy through a very complex mirror neuron system.
Okay.
But when we consume polarizing media or, step into a hostile conflict, our amygdala, which is the prehistoric fear and threat center of the brain, it just hijacks the entire system.
It just takes over completely.
Yeah, it triggers a primal fight or flight response. And at that exact moment, your heart rate spikes, your vision literally narrows, and you stop thinking critically. You just start surviving.
But the incredible part, and this is what blew me away, is what happens when you step into a safe space. When you sit across from someone with a completely different, maybe even highly challenging worldview, and you just listen without getting defensive.
Your biology flips.
Yes. The prefrontal cortex, the logical reasoning part of your brain, steps in and puts the brakes on that panicked amygdala.
It acts like a neurological override.
Exactly. Your cortisol, which is the stress hormone, it plummets. And your oxytocin, the trust hormone, spikes. So dialogue isn't just a nice, polite hobby. It is a literal neuroplastic medical intervention. You are physically rewiring your brain's architecture of fear.
And this is exactly where the spiritual wisdom beautifully overlays the hard science. Because the crazy thing is, thousands of years before fMRI machines or brain scans even existed, ancient mystics and prophets had already figured out how to bypass this exact amygdala response.
They already had the cheat codes.
Yes. They built cultural guardrails to force people out of their tribal fear.
Let's actually look at how they engineered these cognitive hacks. Instead of just reading down a checklist of world religions, take Judaism, for example.
It's a perfect example.
They developed this profound concept of tikkun olam, which means repairing the world. It's this idea that divine sparks were scattered across the universe into all peoples, and it is our active duty to gather them through just actions.
Right.
The Talmud even states that saving one single soul is like saving an entire world. Any soul, not just the soul of someone in your specific in-group.
Exactly. And in Christianity, you see a very similar cognitive intervention with the concept of agape or unconditional love. But it's really most striking when you look at the parables.
Like the Good Samaritan. I feel like people today treat it like a cute children's story about just being a nice neighbor.
Oh, totally. It's lost its edge.
But in the first century, that story was a calculated, radical provocation. It was a neurological hack because Jews and Samaritans deeply despised each other.
Right.
There was intense ethnic and religious hostility.
Deep, deep hatred.
So for Jesus to make the hero, the lifesaver, a member of the hated outgroup, while the religious insiders walked right past the dying man, I mean, that was a theological earthquake. It forced the listeners to short-circuit their in-group bias. It meant goodness absolutely shatters tribal boundaries.
You see that exact same push against tribalism in Islam, too. The Quran explicitly states in Surah 49, verse 13, that humanity was created into different nations and tribes specifically so that they may know one another.
So diversity is the whole point.
Yes. Diversity isn't framed as an accident or an inconvenience. It is a divine mandate. And when this was practiced politically, like during the Golden Age in Andalusia, Jewish, Christian, and Muslim scholars actually sat down together and sparked massive advancements in science and philosophy.
That's amazing.
And Eastern traditions approach this exact same goal through interconnectedness. Buddhism teaches that nothing exists in isolation. Harming others mechanically inevitably harms yourself.
You know, it's so tempting when you hear all these beautiful concepts, repairing the world, the Good Samaritan, interconnectedness, to fall into a very comfortable, modern, secular trap.
That we're all the same trap.
Right. It's so easy to say, you see, deep down, we all believe the exact same thing. We just use different words.
It's a very well-meaning thought, but it is a massive intellectual trap. Blending everything into one giant gray soup is actually an act of intellectual laziness.
Yeah, it really is.
If we are going to have real, resilient dialogue, we have to look objectively and fearlessly at how starkly different these worldviews actually are.
I completely agree, because erasing our differences in the name of tolerance is actually incredibly disrespectful to the specific genius of those traditions.
It waters them down.
Exactly. Think of it like a Beethoven symphony. A symphony isn't beautiful because every single instrument plays the exact same note on the exact same frequency.
That would just be noise.
Right, if they did, it would just be a flat, deafening drone. The music is breathtaking precisely because completely different instruments, different timbres, and opposing rhythms are clashing and counterpointing each other, so we cannot pretend the differences don't exist.
We really can't.
Let's get specific about how opposing some of these views really are, just to prove the point.
Okay, let's take the concept of time and human destiny. In the Abrahamic traditions, so Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, time is generally linear.
Point A to point B.
Exactly. There is a creation, a historical progression, and eventually a definitive final judgment. Actions in this one life lead to an eternal outcome. But if you look at Eastern traditions like Hinduism and Buddhism, the fundamental architecture of reality is cyclical.
Right, the wheel.
Yes. You have karma and the endless wheel of death and rebirth. The ultimate spiritual goal there isn't to reach a final judgment, it's to escape the cycle entirely.
Those are completely incompatible truths. You can't just politely gloss over the fact that one side believes history ends in a final resurrection, and the other believes history is an endless loop you need to break out of.
You truly can't. And that is exactly the point. The goal of dialogue isn't to solve that theological disagreement. This is where the philosopher Martin Buber comes in.
Oh, I love Buber's work on this.
Right. He defined what he called the I-thou relationship. Usually we treat the world and the people in it as an object to be analyzed, categorized, converted, or defeated.
Just a data point.
Exactly. But true encounter happens when we treat the other person as an unfathomable thou. You recognize their absolute dignity and their ungraspable depth. You don't try to solve them, you meet them.
I really love that. You don't treat them as a puzzle to solve. You treat them as a thou. Which brings us to what I think is the ultimate superpower of our modern age. Ambiguity tolerance.
Yes. Ambiguity tolerance.
It's this ability to sit in a room with someone who holds a completely opposing worldview, feel the intense tension of that disagreement, and not reach for a weapon.
Because it requires the sober realization that human consciousness is biologically and historically limited. We only ever hold fragments of the truth.
Think about ambiguity tolerance, like having binocular vision. If you close one eye, your field of vision is totally flat. But if you open both eyes, your left eye sees an object from one angle, and your right eye sees it from a slightly different, opposing angle.
Right.
Your brain doesn't panic because the two images are different. It doesn't shut one eye down to force conformity. It takes the difference between those two opposing angles and uses it to create 3D depth.
That is a phenomenal mechanical way to understand it.
Ambiguity tolerance is societal 3D vision. It's letting the tension of our differences give the world actual depth.
Wow. Yeah, when we lack ambiguity tolerance, we are essentially walking around with one eye closed, terrified of any perspective that challenges our flat view of the world.
But this all begs the practical question, right? Philosophy and theology are great in a vacuum. They sound amazing on a deep dive like this, but they usually just gather dust in books.
Theory only goes so far.
Exactly. So how do we actually build this symphony of differences out in the real fractured world? What does the architecture of peace actually look like in practical reality?
Well, it requires tangible infrastructure, both physical and digital. And the proof is that it's working right now. Let's look at physical spaces first. In Berlin, there is a project called the House of One.
I've heard of this.
It's amazing. They have literally built a synagogue, a church, and a mosque as completely equal prayer spaces under a single roof. And they're all gathered around a shared secular meeting space.
That's incredible. Just the physical design forces an encounter. You literally can't enter your own place of worship without acknowledging the dignity of the other two right next door.
Precisely. It's not some abstract utopia. It's physical reality built in stone. When you enter a space like that, you are physically breathing in the norm of tolerance.
But as you hinted at, physical spaces aren't enough anymore, are they? We live online. We need digital counterstructures.
We absolutely do, because the algorithms that dictate our digital lives are fueled by rage baiting and division. If it bleeds, it leads. We really need platforms fighting back.
Like what?
Look at the virtual platforms built by organizations like KI Side. They run intensive digital seminars for leaders in highly volatile conflict zones, particularly in parts of Africa.
Wow, so right in the middle of active conflicts.
Yes. And they've proven that even in the most unstable, explosive geopolitical regions, if you methodically structure a digital dialogue, you can bypass the outrage algorithm and actually bridge divides.
But if we were talking about digital spaces, we absolutely have to talk about the most vital demographic for this architecture, which is the youth.
Oh, without a doubt. The future of dialogue isn't happening at elite diplomatic conferences in Geneva. It's happening online and on the playground.
And young people today are just being torn apart by the algorithms. They urgently need safe spaces where they can deconstruct the warped, internet-fueled versions of religion and ideology they are fed online.
Right, spaces where they aren't judged.
Yes, they need to be able to do that without the terror of being labeled a heretic by their parents or being exiled by their peers. They need the absolute freedom to ask the hard, messy questions and admit they just don't have it all figured out.
And if we want the ultimate unifying force that transcends every single demographic, youth, elders, conservatives, progressives, we have to look at eco-theology.
The environment.
Exactly. Because theory might separate us, but shared survival action unites us instantly.
I mean, a Category 5 hurricane does not care about your theology.
Yeah.
It does not distinguish between the roof of a Hindu temple, a Christian church, or an atheist's home.
Exactly. When you see global religious leaders uniting with indigenous leaders and scientists to protect the physical earth, interreligious dialogue stops being a talking point for theologians.
It becomes real.
It becomes a literal, practical survival mechanism for the human species. The existential mega crises of our era, climate collapse, resource wars, unaligned AI, none of these threats ask about our religious denomination before they strike. We are forced into a community of shared fate.
Which brings us right back to you, the person listening to this deep dive right now. We can talk about global architecture, African conflict zones, and massive physical temples in Berlin all day long.
We could.
But the architectural blueprint for a peaceful future doesn't start at the UN. It starts at your kitchen table. It starts in your neighborhood.
It really does. From the entanglement of quantum physics to the deepest insights of ancient mysticism, the undeniable truth is that we are biologically and spiritually entangled on this tiny, fragile blue planet.
We're all this together.
We are. We will either learn to live together or we will unequivocally perish together. Stepping out of your cozy, curated echo chamber isn't a threat to your identity. It is a brilliant, urgent invitation to expand your mind and build that 3D vision we talked about.
So instead of our usual sign-off today, we want to leave you with a specific, inspiring challenge to carry into your day.
Think about this one carefully.
Think of one person in your life whose worldview completely contradicts your own. How can you approach them tomorrow? Not with the goal of debating them, or winning an argument, or correcting their facts. Or correcting their facts, but simply to listen. How can you sit in the tension of that difference, bypass your own fear, and truly understand their thou? Take that thought with you.